Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bowinn Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, and I'm honored to be here today on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Today, we will be providing information on wildfire preparedness and the wildfire season outlook. I'm pleased to be joined by Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests, responsible for the BC Wildfire Service, Matt MacDonald, Lead Fire Weather Forecaster with the BC Wildfire Service, and Neal McLoughlin, Superintendent of Predictive Services with the BC Wildfire Service. We also have several other folks on the line to help answer questions that you may have. This week, Canadians right across the country have been impacted by wildfire and smoke from wildfires. With heightened temperatures this week and with summer on our doorstep, British Columbians are understandably wondering what the summer will be like in terms of wildfire. This wildfire season in British Columbia is already well underway and has been since mid-April. There are currently 82 wildfires burning across the province, and since April 1st, 2023, 382 wildfires have burned a total of 520,520 hectares. Already, the number of hectares burned this season exceeds the total number of hectares burned in 16 of the last 20 wildfire seasons. 99% of this fire activity so far has been within the Prince George Fire Centre, which includes central and northeastern BC. More than 1,000 personnel have been directly engaged in wildfire response efforts in the North Peace over the last month. Significant fires are also being responded to in the coastal region of the province. I know that this is a concerning time for people who are impacted by the Highway 4 closure due to the Cameron Bluff wildfire. Please know that this closure is temporary. A detour is in place, but it should also only be used for emergencies. We continue to ensure that people have the essentials that they need. Trucks are making it through the detour route. There is no need to stock up on essential supplies. We are asking people to stay calm and purchase only what you need so that everyone in your communities can access the supplies that they require. Let's continue to look out for each other. I would like to thank the dedicated and professional and expert staff members from the BC Wildfire Service for all of their work to date and for their work to come this season. As well, I want to acknowledge the local fire departments that often consist of volunteers for their work in assisting to responding to wildfires. I would also like to thank communities and volunteers in evacuation centers who have supported their neighbors by administering BC's emergency support services. As a reminder, as of noon today, campfires are prohibited in most regions of the province. Open burning fires also remain prohibited across the entire province. Please check prohibitions in your region before lighting a fire of any kind. You can find this information on the BC Wildfire Service website or mobile app. As we move further into the wildfire season, I encourage and urge people to stay informed and to be prepared. While our government is making sure supports and resources are in place for the upcoming wildfire season, it's equally important that people start putting together a plan. Now is the time to understand the hazards that you face in the regions that you live in and to prepare yourselves, your family, your home, and community for any potential fires. We need people to follow all fire bans and avoid activity that may result in a wildfire. Whether you live near an active wildfire or not, I encourage every British Columbian to take 20 minutes out of your day to put together an emergency plan, including packing a grab-and-go emergency kit so that you are prepared to leave immediately if you are required to evacuate. Your grab-and-go bag should include important documents such as identification and insurance papers, and I encourage everyone to review their insurance policy for fire damage. In 2021, during the global pandemic, large-scale wildfire evacuations occurred during a time of public health restrictions, coupled with high vacancy rates in hotels across the province. Now, we have seen a significant resumption of travel and tourism, which means that hotels are not as widely available as they were in 2021. As a result, accommodation may look different in the event of significant evacuations, with greater emphasis on group lodging at community centers, and on billeting. My ministry continues to work closely with First Nations, local authorities, and other partners to identify communities and venues that can support evacuees in the event of a large-scale evacuation. This advanced planning will help keep evacuees safe and as close to their homes as possible. In the event that you are evacuated, you may find it more suitable for you and your immediate family to stay with family and friends in a community that is safe from wildfires. It is worth making those connections now and having those conversations with family and friends in other areas of the province early. I want to reassure you that if you choose to stay with family and friends, you will still be eligible for emergency support services if you require assistance, to help with costs related to billeting, food, and incidentals. I want to emphasize that the province, First Nations, and local authorities will be there to assist all families or individuals who need accommodation or assistance. Last year, our government provided British Columbians with one more tool to support them in preparing for a wildfire or other disaster. We made it possible for people to pre-register with emergency support services online using the evacuee registration and assistance tool. Pre-registration means that evacuees don't need to spend time signing up while they are in an emergency. So individuals and families can pre-register now at ess.gov.bc.ca. That's ess.gov.bc.ca. During emergencies, the province amplifies all evacuation alerts and orders issued by local communities on Emergency Info BC and Emergency Info BC's Twitter account. The BC Wildfire Service website, social media channels, and the BC Wildfire Service mobile app, which is available for Apple and Android devices, provides the location and details of all active wildfires in BC. This BC Wildfire Service app is also where you can report a wildfire. During an emergency, these platforms also share advice and resources to help people and communities stay safe. The province may also issue broadcast intrusive alerts for evacuations on behalf of communities. It is important that British Columbians are aware of these sources of information before an emergency takes place. We are seeing the impacts of climate change all around us. Climate-related emergencies are increasing. Just last month, we were dealing with flooding in parts of the province. Disaster financial assistance is available for eligible British Columbians in southeast and central areas of the province who were affected by flooding between April 27th and May 16th this year. We have also seen that heat events are becoming more frequent and projected to become more severe due to climate change. Heat is now a part of our reality, and it is critical that British Columbians understand what they can do to protect themselves and their loved ones if these events happen. Our government has worked to improve public education, communication, and services during heat events. This includes launching the BC Heat Alert and Response System, providing funding for local governments to proactively open cooling centers and provide transportation for vulnerable people, supporting First Nations and local authorities by introducing a new extreme heat funding stream under the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, and releasing the Prepared BC Extreme Heat Preparedness Guide so individuals and families can take steps to prepare. During periods of hot weather, make sure you stay hydrated, find cool or shady locations, and check in on vulnerable family members and friends. I understand that heading into a potentially hazardous wildfire season can be unsettling for people, but I want to assure British Columbians that we are working hard to ensure communities are prepared and have the supports that they need in the event of a wildfire or other climate-related emergency. We urge individuals and families to take the necessary steps to prepare. By taking steps to be prepared and knowing where to find information, we can all gain a sense of control, sense of safety, and peace of mind. Be calm, be alert, be prepared this wildfire season. Let's enjoy the summer, but let's do it safely. And with that, I will pass it on to Minister Bruce Ralston, Minister of Forests.
Thank you very much, Minister Ma. Let me begin by recognizing the First Nations on whose territory we're gathered. I'm grateful to be speaking to you from the territory of the Lil'wat Nation and the Squamish Nation. As Minister Ma has said, there are 82 wildfires burning across British Columbia. We've seen major fires and impacts this spring. And let me begin by acknowledging all the people who've been impacted by fire and by smoke. It's extremely difficult living day to day with smoke or near a fire, knowing that it might lead to an evacuation alert or order. I want to express my sincere thanks to the firefighters, first responders, emergency management teams, highway crews, and communities who are working tirelessly to keep people safe. The BC Wildfire Service is working around the clock to suppress fires, reduce impacts on communities, and share up-to-date information with the public. Several factors have combined to raise concerns about the current fire season. We had a very dry spring across the province. It was the hottest May on record, resulting in rapid snowmelt. The risk of flooding has gone down, but the prospect of drought is very high. As always, our experts, who you will hear from shortly, are able to track climate conditions against the buildup of drying and dead material on the forest floor and forecast areas of specific concern for potential wildfires. These conditions, if they persist, can impact how fast fires grow and how aggressively they burn. Lightning-caused fires typically peak later in the summer. We all remain very appreciative of the 2,000 BC Wildfire Service personnel dedicated to responding to the threat posed by wildfires. As Minister of Forests, I want to thank you to those workers and their families for supporting them through what's already a difficult fire season in parts of our province. Ahead of this year, we made critical investments, the largest in our province's history, to strengthen wildfire preparedness and response. Most importantly, we moved BC Wildfire Service to year-round operations to boost fire preparedness and planning. This year, BC Wildfire Service hired 100 new permanent staff and brought on 330 new recruits for fighting fires. We've invested in new structure protection units, drones, camp infrastructure, and mass water delivery systems to assist with fire suppression. We doubled the annual funding for wildfire prevention programs. BC weather stations have been upgraded, and innovative technology is being deployed to support predictive services and assist in preparedness, detection, and response. But there's still more to do. Given recent history and knowing that climate change will result in more impactful fires, we will keep working to boost the staff and equipment of the BC Wildfire Service. Let me also recognize the work of First Nations and local governments who've already been responding to fires and preparing their communities to be wildfire ready. Thank you to all the BC communities and families who've undertaken the work required to become a designated Fire Spark community. I urge all communities to subscribe to that program. As we boost capacity at the BC Wildfire Service, we are also supporting the efforts of local governments and First Nations governments to prepare for fires, reduce wildfire risks, and respond to fires when they occur. In summary, we continue to address the threat of fires proactively. We continue to expand our response capacity and provide support to communities. And we continue to connect with the experts who can give us a sense of what may lie ahead for the remainder of this season. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the BC Wildfire Service personnel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Minister Ralston. My name is Matt MacDonald. I'm the lead fire weather forecaster with the BC Wildfire Service, and I'm very grateful to be here with you today to give you a glimpse of where we've been and where we're heading. I'm also grateful to be presenting today from the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa, the Sayelks, and the Sinixt First Nations people. So before we look out into the future, it's actually really practical to look at where we've been. And if you remember back to the fall of 2022, it was a very dry, very warm October. And believe it or not, that really set the stage for the 2023 wildfire season. In more recent memory, just having wrapped up the month of May, it was another record-breaking month, both in terms of heat and pronounced drought. And on your screen right now, you can see the temperature anomalies. So how cold or warm was it compared to normal for the entire month of May? And as you can see by the sea of red across Western Canada, it was an extremely warm month. In fact, 16 communities across the province of British Columbia set records for the all-time hottest May, and many of these records stemming back to the late 1800s. So very hot and additionally very dry. The image on the right-hand side speaks to the precipitation we received or the lack thereof, and the hues of brown speak to 80 or 90% less precipitation than normal. So very small drops in a rather empty bucket. Focusing a little bit more on that heat, it was truly exceptional. And it wasn't just a few days or even a couple of weeks, it was really the entire month of May, a month which is typically cool and showery in British Columbia, was actually very hot and very dry. As an example here, we've pulled out the temperatures at Williams Lake in the Caribou Fire Center, and you can see that each and every individual day, we're showing temperature anomalies. So again, compared to historical averages that were consistently 5, 6, and 8, even 10 degrees warmer than normal. And you'll notice that we only had 2 little blue bars there in the 3rd week of May. So very hot. And what this did is it accelerated the curing of our fuels, of our forests, but it also accelerated the melt of our snowpacks in the Alpine. That obviously brought some concern from a Frechette point of view, and we've borrowed this slide here from our colleagues at the River Forecast Center. But I'll draw your attention to the black line here that represents the rapid decline in the provincial snowpacks as we headed through the month of May. So we shed that snow extremely fast. Fortunately, there wasn't too much flooding, but again, what this did is it made our fuels available to lightning ignition. So lightning typically strikes in the Alpine at ridgetop, and once those fuels are no longer buried in snow rather, they become receptive to fuel. So we've melted that snow 3 to 4 weeks earlier than normal. And again, as we approach the peak of lightning season, those fuels are ready to be ignited. Touching on the drought a little bit more before I pass it over to my colleague, Neal McLoughlin, there's many different ways we can define drought. There's drought from an agricultural perspective, there's drought from a hydrological perspective, and then of course there's drought from a forest and fuel perspective. And this spring and early summer, we're all agreeing that this drought is widespread and it's rather persistent. And the image on the left-hand side here shows you the total amount of precipitation compared to normal that we've seen since March 1st. So over the last 90 days, how much rain has fallen across British Columbia. And you'll notice many hues of yellow and orange, indicating drier than normal conditions. The one exception being the Southern Peace, which is actually where we have our large fires that are currently burning. We, of course, have the Tumbler Ridge fire further north in and around Fort St. John, and then extending all the way up to the very northeastern corner in Fort Nelson. It may seem surprising to see some green there, but we have to remember the fashion in which this precipitation came. So we actually had a 2-day wonder of heavy rainfall. We picked up 40 to 50 millimeters of rain. And when we receive rain in that type of fashion, it doesn't infiltrate the ground. It doesn't help our fuels much. It's too much in a short period of time. And really those fires just kept burning only a couple days after all that rainfall. Another example I can point out here is in Prince George, in the center part of the province, where over the past 90 days, we typically would have picked up around 115, 120 millimeters of rain, and this year we only picked up about half of that at 58 millimeters. So it just speaks to the drought in not only 1 or 2 pockets, but really many pockets of the province. And to tell you more about how the fuels have responded to that drought, I'll pass it over to Neal McLoughlin, who is our superintendent of Predictive Services.
Thank you, Matt. So we're going to continue the story here and look at how these antecedent weather conditions are going to show up in terms of the fire environment and as well as in terms of fire behavior we're observing this season. And so on this graph, we're looking at the buildup index. This is a measure of fuel availability, and it's composed of 2 moisture codes. that represent medium and coarse size fuels, as well as the shallow and deep duff layers of the soil. As this index increases, it's indicating that fuels are increasingly drier and more available to burn. What you're seeing on this map is not necessarily the index value that we would calculate, but how anomalous it is for this time of year. And so this graph represents May 29th of 2023, and the colors of yellow into deeper reds are indicating above normal buildup index values for this time of year. What that means is that our fuels are increasingly available to burn, and more so than they would typically be for this time of year. The other thing I'll draw your attention to is that there are some areas of white on the map in the southeast corner. They're normal. There is nowhere on this map that we're seeing anything that's below normal for this time of year. So this map is now 10 days old, and we've been drying fuel steadily since then. One more message about this slide. These are very slow-moving indices, and this story didn't start in May this year. In fact, we saw elevated drought levels in the northeast and the southwest corners of the province last fall, and we're carrying forward several years of dry conditions that are being further exacerbated by the weather conditions that Matt just shared. So we'll move to the next slide and look at some fire behavior and how these conditions are reflected. On the left-hand side, we're looking at a picture of the Donnie Creek complex fire on May 26th. And what's really interesting is that this fire did actually receive a fairly good amount of precipitation, 40 millimeters of rain. But in this picture, what you're seeing is that we had a subsequent 30-kilometer fire run in just 5 days after that rain was received. And this fire is now well over 300,000 hectares in size. On the right-hand side, we're looking at a fire that's in our coastal fire center, the Newcastle Creek fire. This photo was taken recently on June 3rd. And what you're looking at is the root bulb of a large tree and the depth of burn. I draw your attention to the Pulaski that's in the foreground. The handle on that Pulaski is about 1 meter in length. And so we're looking at 1 meter of fuel consumption in the early fire season. This might be typical in a really dry fall, but to see this showing up in early May and June is very anomalous. And so, why we share these photos is, one question we might get is, are you confident in the metrics that are reflective of expected fire behavior? And the best way that we can have confidence is how that reflects in fire behavior. And so these pictures are very much an indication that our metrics are a good indication of what we can expect in terms of fire behavior, and they're aligned very well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Matt. I'd like him to share with us the outlook for the summer ahead.
Great, thank you, Neal. So Neal and I have just set the stage for where we've been, where we currently sit, and now we'll shift gears and look into the future. We're fortunate to work very closely with the great meteorologists at Environment and Climate Change Canada. They recently issued their summer outlook for 2023, and we'll start with the top left image, which is the probabilistic chart for June. And really what we're looking at here is not necessarily the intensity of the heat, but the probability of 3 different categories. And so in hues of orange and red is high probabilities of a warmer than normal June. And you can see that right across Western Canada. As we shift into July, those hues simmer down, if you like, to about 40 or 50%, so a little less of a stronger signal. And then as we get into August, that signal re-intensifies. We get back into those deeper oranges. And so if we put the 3 months together, you get the larger image, which is the seasonal outlook for temperatures for 2023. And as you can see, there's a fairly strong signal right across the country for a warmer than normal summer. And these long-term seasonal forecasts need to be taken with a grain of salt. Right now we're very confident that this current heat spell is going to end this weekend. We'll get into some more seasonal weather next week, but then we have more heat on the way. From a precipitation perspective, Again, we'll start with the panel in the top left corner there. And as you can see from the shades of brown, we're expecting a very dry June. Of course, we're already 8 days through the beginning of June. We are expecting a little bit of showers later on next week. But, given those persistent deep drought conditions that Neal spoke to, it's not going to be enough rainfall to alleviate these deep persistent drought conditions right across the province. I should emphasize that unfortunately, despite the advancements in science, the skill of anything longer than perhaps a 2-week forecast from a rainfall perspective just simply doesn't have too much skill. So we'll have to see what the remainder of summer will bring as we get into the true core of fire season, which is July and August. But suffice to say that those are typically our driest months, and the possibility of playing catch up is very limited. So going forward from this point, we thought it'd be helpful to lay out 3 possible scenarios. And we'll start with the one on the left, which is currently what we're experiencing in across all of British Columbia. It's very hot outside. We're reaching the mid-30s again today in the interior. Not only is it hot, but it's extremely dry. We really keep close eye on relative humidities, and those have been down in the single digits. So when we get below 10% relative humidity, which we are currently doing across a good chunk of the interior of the province, those are like desert-like conditions, and it just, again, accelerates the drying of those fuels and exacerbates the drought. And as I mentioned, we're going to be in this pattern until the weekend. We see a pattern change, which unfortunately is going to be accompanied by thunderstorms and strong winds. Will not bode well for existing fires, and then may again ignite new fires. In the middle of the screen, we have kind of the normal pattern, and typically, we get beautiful summers in British Columbia. That's a lot of why a lot of us live here, and we usually see the ridge of California that lives off the coast move up off the coast of British Columbia. And so even if a normal pattern should play out, we need to remember that, summers in BC are warm and typically pretty dry. And then the most unlikely scenario right now is the one on the right-hand side, which is the development of a big upper trough, or what we call an upper low. And these systems sometimes can stagnate on place and, deliver those January type conditions that we've had in the past. Unfortunately, there's not really much indication of that developing. Again, we're going to have a little blip in this heat and this dryness next week, which will be welcome by almost everyone. But further on into the latter half of June, it looks like we're back into scenario number 1 there. So with that, I'll pass it back to Neal to talk about lightning season and wrap up our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So a little bit more about lightning. In the lower left graphic, we're looking at the typical time of year that our lightning season begins. And throughout most of the province of British Columbia, which is highlighted in a bold black outline, we're seeing that we typically see lightning start in the later part of May and really pick up in the month of June and through the rest of the summer. And so that's when it starts. This is important because, as Matt mentioned earlier, we've melted all our snow and we've got more land area available to ignite due to lightning-caused ignitions than typically we would at this time of year. As we look at the graph on the right, this is just showing by month the proportion of our fires that are caused by human activity, unknown causes, or lightning. And so I draw your attention to the darker shades of gray along the bottom. They remain fairly stable, between 75 and 100 starts per month throughout the whole fire season. But when we look at lightning, we see a very upward trend as we shift into May, whereas, lightning season is starting, picks up in June, and our busiest months are then July and August. Where we can see upwards of 250 to 300 lightning-caused fires per month. And so, when you do the math on that, the number of fires we're seeing per week, it's a lot to keep up to. What we're most concerned about this year, as I mentioned earlier, with snowmelt now in our past, we could be seeing even more ignitions earlier, 3 to 4 weeks earlier in the month of June. So those patterns that Matt was just sharing, one of our big concerns is the rate at which we see these lightning events occur. And so, we could get scattered lightning and at a slower pace, or we could see a big weather system change that brings widespread lightning all at once. And those are very concerning situations to fire agencies where there's more fire than we may be able to respond to. And when we've got fuels available to burn and potentially associated with fast wind speeds, it's a very challenging situation for fire agencies. We'll move to the next slide and look at one more fire behavior indicator and how that's reflecting this fire season. So these graphs are showing you our drought code value. This is reflective of our slowest moving moisture code, the largest size fuels, the deepest duff layers. And our current fire season is the large map on the left-hand side. And as you see the colors of yellow into orange, those are indicating very high levels of drought condition or low fuel moisture in our largest size class fuels. They take a very long time to recharge with moisture. And when we look across the last 6 years, for this time of year, we're seeing a very different pattern on the landscape. And I do want to mention that of those last 6 years, 3 of them are some of the larger fire seasons in BC's recent history. We've included some hectares burned by that time of year, June 6th, for each of those historical reference points. And where we're sitting this year at well over 450,000 hectares far exceeds any of those previous years. And so quite alarming to see this amount of area burning this early in the season. And it certainly doesn't bode well for the remainder of the summer with the outlook that Matt has shared. So we'll move into some closing points for our summer outlook. I'd really like to leave you with some key takeaways. We've I think articulated several different ways that our fuels are available to burn. And there's really kind of 3 key ingredients when it comes to extreme fire behavior. 1 is that fuels are available to burn. 2 is that we have strong winds. And 3, the key ingredient that I just finished speaking to you about is that we get ignitions. And so when we put the 3 of those together, it's a very challenging fire season outlook. High elevations are currently snow-free, and so we are expecting that lightning season will start earlier. In fact, we're already seeing early signs of that with fires at upper elevations burning quite aggressively. The sustained warm conditions that Matt spoke to in terms of the summer outlook are going to further exacerbate fuel availability, but with that comes the risk of thunderstorms and potential wind events as we see these weather patterns shift, which will escalate fire load and challenge our fire suppression capacity. Now, nationally, we tend to leverage resource sharing agreements with our partnering agencies, and when we are in need, we can call on them for help. I'm sure a lot of you have been watching the news or hearing news clips about the national situation. All agencies across Canada are busy this year, and there is a real shortage of resources for sharing. And so this could be a year where we have to really dig deep and use the resources we have here in BC to address our situation. So my parting message and what I really want to make clear to everyone is that it's more important than ever to be responsible with permitted fire use and extremely cautious with any activity that could spark a wildfire. Wildfire prohibitions and restrictions are already in place for most of the province, and we should expect that they'll continue throughout most of the fire season as our fire hazard continues to go up and we are challenged by the fire situation. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Minister Ma as we move into our question period. Thank you.
Impacting people all across the country. People are British Columbians are concerned about wildfires here, and we are certainly anticipating a challenging season ahead. But I do want to assure British Columbians that our government is doing everything necessary to make sure that the proper supports and resources are in place for the upcoming season. At the same time, it is vitally important that every member of our community, our collective community, every individual, every household, be prepared for what is coming as well. Start putting together a plan, get your grab and go kit together, stay informed, stay calm, be alert, be prepared. And with that, I welcome questions for our team.
Thank you very much. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue for the opportunity to ask a question and a follow-up. Thank you very much, everyone, for bearing with us as we faced some audio-visual challenges for this availability. I will also note that we have additional speakers on the line who are available to answer questions should they pertain to their subject matter expertise. We are going to start in the room. We'll hear first from Lauren Collins, Black Press. Lauren, please go ahead.
Based on the comments about the situation countrywide, is BC looking into more international resources to plan ahead?
So British Columbia earlier in the wildfire season did deploy some teams over to Alberta. We are calling them back here to British Columbia within the next few days. We are putting in requests for additional resources and getting in line for some of those international resources as well. I'll also pass it on to Minister Ralston and his team over at the BC Wildfire Service to provide further comments.
Great, thank you very much. Some of you will have noted that today President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Trudeau and offered the support of the American Wildfire Service. There's a similar pooling agency that pools national resources in the United States. And so I would turn it over to either Neal or Matt or Chris, I think is also on the line, to talk a little bit further about that.
Yeah, thank you, Minister Ma and Minister Ralston. My name is Cliff Chapman. I am the Director of Provincial Operations for BC Wildfire Service. And thank you for your question about international support. So we have a request into CIFC, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, that manages Canadian resources. That's how we did deploy resources to Alberta earlier in the spring. And we have a request in, multiple requests in actually with CIFC to seek additional support for BC, not so much for the next 72 hours. We still have resources available in BC as we speak today, but it's really about trying to plan for the next 2, 3, 5 weeks. So we have requests in for, right now it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 staff to come and support our firefighting efforts, from ground resources, so firefighting resources, all the way up to incident management teams to support our efforts in BC as we continue to see fire on the landscape in our province.
Lauren, do you have a follow-up?
Look like in BC right now? I know there's provinces or fires throughout the province, on the island, up in the north, southeast.
Sure, Cliff, we'll stay with you. You probably have the numbers on that.
Sorry, the question came through broken. Can I get the question again?
Yes. What do the resources look like throughout the province? I know there's fires on the island, the northeast, the southeast, ongoing right now. Yeah,
so resourcing right now as it pertains to British Columbia, and you heard Minister Ralston talk about our uplift that we've seen over the last 12 months as we continue to evolve as an organization, a 12-month-of-the-year organization for better preparedness. So we have resources engaged really from north to south and east to west. And some of those resources, we would say they're on preparedness. So they are essentially waiting for the call for new fires should we receive any. And we call that our initial attack. And then we have obviously just over 1,000 people engaged right now on our current fires. So from the northeast predominantly is where many of our resources are, but we also have seen a shift where we've started to send resources to the island. And it continue to ensure that we have resources across the province for those new starts. You know, our best chance of success as we continue through whatever this fire season may bring is to really surge and focus on initial attack. When we first see a fire, when we first get a report of a fire, to really attack that fire as aggressively as we can from the air, from the ground, and with crew resources. And again, I would urge the public, that's why we continue to urge the public to download our mobile app, to know the numbers, *5555 on your cell phone. If you see smoke, even if you think it's been reported, please call it in. If it is a repeat smoke, that's good for us because it allows us the ability to really surge to those initial new starts. And if it's an existing fire, that's okay. We'll know that from our mapping and our GIS. So please let us know if you see smoke in the landscape.
Our next question also comes from the room. We'll hear from Seth, Forward Globe and Mail. Seth, please go ahead.
Is there any threat to infrastructure currently, and what is the plan to deal with those threats this summer?
Well, certainly there are always potential threats to infrastructure depending on the hazard that we are facing. I would say that it's probably too early to guess where those impacts are going to be, but I open up the floor to the team if anyone wants to comment on it now. I mean, certainly Highway 4 is already impacted. Maybe Janelle, actually. I'll stop talking now. Janelle, maybe you can speak a little bit about Highway 4 and what the impacts are there right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Minister. So right now we do have Highway 4 on Vancouver Island closed between Port Alberni and Highway 19. And with that closure, what we are seeing is as a result of the fire, we have material and debris upslope of the fire that is actually coming down onto the highway. So while BC Wildfire Services are fighting the fire, we're also monitoring the fire from the air from a geotechnical perspective. So once that fire is out, we can assess any upslope damage. We can make sure that any danger trees or any boulders are mitigated prior to reopening the highway. At this point, we have seen trees and boulders come down onto the highway, but those have not actually impacted the physical integrity of the highway.
Thank you, Janelle. And I think in addition to the highway impacts, we have been dealing with potential community impacts really since the middle of April. So there's been evacuation alerts and orders for communities in the Chilcotin, for communities across the Prince George Fire Center. And now we're starting to see that hazard shift to the south. So we are likely to see continual evac orders and alerts as fire season presses on. And in terms of our strategy on what we do, that is really how we prioritize fires in the province when we are looking to surge our resources to the most viable or the highest priority fires. It is about what are the potential impacts. And just as we're speaking today, we're hearing of a potential impact up in the Northeast, and not impacting a community directly, but potentially expanding an evacuation order. And as you've seen through the wildfires of note, and I encourage folks to look at the wildfires of note to get an update on where our fires are at, as well as associated evac alerts and orders. That is where the information is housed on the bcwildfire.ca website. So we will continue to see that. And it is part of the investment that Minister Ralston spoke about was an increase in our structure protection and structure defense capacity. The ability for us to send the right resources, working with the local government and First Nation government and volunteer, as well as structural fire departments, to go and deploy sprinklers, to go and set up water lines so that we can do everything in our power to protect homes and protect communities should a fire be approaching them. So that's something that's been a significant investment over the last couple of years, and we have some of our own technology now that we can deploy onto fires such as the ones in the north right now.
Do you have a follow-up, Seth?
Yeah, would you be able to put a number on the funding for infrastructure, like preparedness, or like keeping that number down?
Right. I mean, what we know in the emergency management world, what we know is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Every dollar that we spend on preparation and mitigation, mitigating impacts of disasters before they happen, is worth potentially order of magnitude in terms of response and recovery costs. We saw how much impact has been caused by previous wildfire seasons, as well as the atmospheric river events as well. With the creation of the new Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness is a renewed focus and effort on those prevention and mitigative efforts. So we, for instance, have the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund that was recently topped up with an additional $180 million on top of a previously allotted $189 million. That is funding that is provided to communities and local governments and First Nations to support them in their mitigation efforts. Certainly, different ministries also have their mitigative efforts as well. For instance, when it comes to seismic hazards, Ministry of Education and Childcare are doing seismic upgrades. Ministry of Transportation also has a seismic program that they have underway. Since the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness was created, we have announced just our ministry, over $250 million in investments in mitigation efforts to funding for local governments and communities. But that is not all that we are doing. We also recognize that it's as big of a number as it might sound right now. It's scratching the surface of what needs to be done. There's a lot of work ahead of us right across the government.
And for the next question, we are going to the phones. Our first question from the phones comes from Richard Zussman, Global News. Richard, please go ahead.
I believe that that is a question for the BC Wildfire Service.
Richard, are you able to repeat your question just so we can hear it here on the Zoom? We weren't able to pick it up.
Of course.
Apologies, we still can't hear your question over Zoom. Would we be able to get
The question was about how this wildfire season compares with historic wildfire seasons in the past, and is this likely to, the question was whether this was likely to be the worst wildfire season that we have experienced in the province. Is that right, Richard? Thank you. It's probably a BC Wildfire Service question.
Thank you for the question. I think this is something that we get asked quite frequently, is how does this season stack up to past seasons? You saw from Neal and Matt's presentation how we've stacked up to date. And I think it wouldn't be going out on a limb to say that this has been one of the most challenging wildfire seasons to date. So from the beginning of April until June 8th, it has been very challenging, and the numbers represent that. We're seeing really on our 10-year average, we would see roughly 20,000 hectares of fire on the landscape at this point in the year. And those include 2017, 2018, and 2021, three of the most challenging fire seasons BC has ever faced. So 20,000 hectares is our 10-year average, and we're at just over 500,000 hectares burned so far this spring. So hard to forecast whether or not it will be as challenging as some of the seasons in the past, 17, 18, and 2021. But I would say, as we saw through the forecast today with Matt and Neal, that I think British Columbians, BC Wildfire Service, communities, First Nation communities, we all have to be prepared that this season is going to be very challenging, or has the potential to be. Certainly the variables are lining up in such a way that if we don't see significant precipitation, significant rain happen across the province, that we will be carrying hazard. The other ingredient, though, is going to be starts, ignition sources. And as we know, and Neal and Matt spoke to, we are just entering into our lightning season. And with the prohibitions in place, we should see a reduction in human-caused fires, but we can't control the lightning-caused fires, obviously. So it doesn't answer your question directly. I would suggest that as British Columbia, we need to be prepared that this is going to be a very challenging fire season.
Thank you very much, Richard. We'll give it a go for the follow-up. Please proceed. And Minister, are you able to repeat the question, as we're not able to hear it on Zoom?
There, and just because I know that we're having some technical challenges, your latter question, Richard, was about the campfire ban and basically what's to come of that, whether it's going to be in place for the entire summer, how we anticipate it changing, whether it expands or contracts. And your first question was probably a question to Janelle State of Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure about a detour route with, and then I didn't quite catch it. I take it as a Highway 4 detour route. Can you maybe repeat that part?
The province would have to work with management to open the Horn Lake Road as an additional detour around.
I think you said Mosaic Forest Management 4-lane detour route. Is that right? Horn Lake Road. Okay. Is Janelle, maybe that? Yeah.
Thanks, Minister. So we have yesterday opened a detour route between Port Alberni and Lake Cowichan. We've been working closely with private industrial roads as well as Forest Service roads. So that detour route is gravel. It is narrow. It has some challenging segments, but certainly for folks that are essential services, they can travel through there. People who have an essential need to travel, commercial goods to make sure that goods and amenities are getting to and from the West Coast. It's working very well. We have had some people approach us about the possibility of working with Mosaic to open the Horn Lake Connector, as it's called locally. That connects Highway 4 back through Horn Lake a little bit to the north and intersects with Highway 19 just north of Qualicum. We've been chatting with Mosaic about that, and for very specific vehicles, we are using this road with the permission of Mosaic. So emergency services at the request of Mosaic are able to get through there. We have some critical BC Wildfire Services personnel getting through there, as well as ministry maintenance contractors getting through there. This is a single lane road. It only enables traffic to get through if it's piloted. It cannot handle commercial vehicles, and it needs 4x4 vehicles to get through there. So it's certainly not an all-encompassing detour route, but one that is being used very specifically for high need vehicles along the way. But as I said, the detour route that we have operating on industrial roads and Forest Service roads between Port Alberni and Lake Cowichan is working very effectively at this point.
And I'll address your campfire question. And you know, I think it's worth recognizing that this is, and don't quote me on this, but I believe this is the earliest we've seen essentially a provincial-wide campfire prohibition come in this early. As we've heard, and we all know, it's June 8th. Kids are still in school. The camping season is just beginning, and we recognize that people enjoy having campfires. Saying that, we're obviously putting this prohibition on for a reason. The conditions are such that we believe we really cannot afford to have human-caused fires. We heard the update on resource draw across Canada. If we reflect back on the national picture for the 3-month seasonal outlook, the entire country is in hues of red. So the forecast right now is that all of Canada will see hotter and drier conditions for the summer months. So what that means is there'll be less opportunity for us to lean into our partner agencies, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, etc., to have support to fight fires that are in BC. So I am not saying that campfire bans will be on for the duration of the summer, but I also am not saying that they won't be. I think it's something that we take very seriously in BC Wildfire Service, trying to balance the needs of the public with the operational demand and fuel conditions that are happening on the landscape. So if we see significant rainfall, we may start to pull campfire prohibitions off. If we continue to see hot and dry conditions and fires on the landscape, we will likely keep the prohibition on. And that's something that we can obviously take it off and then put it back on again. And that's something that we're always conscious of. So in terms of this, the length and time that the prohibitions will be in place, it's too soon to answer that question. But I think we need to be prepared that if we don't see rain, that prohibitions will remain in place for the foreseeable future.
Thanks very much, Cliff. We're going to go to the next question from the phones. I'm going to be listening on another line, and if it needs repeating, I will do that. We'll go to Mira Baines, CBC. Mira, please go ahead. Thanks very much. Okay, so Mira is asking, what areas, Neal or Matt, are you most concerned about in the province, perhaps for lightning strikes or in general wildfire risk?
Yeah, great question. As we speak, there are actually thunderstorms that are entering the southeast corner of the province, and our fire weather forecaster for the Southeast Fire Center just recently issued a thunderstorm warning. Again, because our fuels are so receptive right now to ignition. And this first round of thunderstorms entering the southeast corner, so we're talking in and around the Fernie, Elkford area, is expected to spread westward through the evening, through Cranbrook, out towards Castlegar, and then even potentially as far west as Osoyoos and the southern Okanagan. So this is a first round of thunderstorms. That pattern persists in through tomorrow. Fortunately, tomorrow's thunderstorms will likely be accompanied by some rain, very spatially diverse, so it's going to be spotty. It could pick up anywhere from 2 millimeters to 20 millimeters, but there are going to be areas that actually don't get any rainfall at all. And then, as we even get into Saturday, that signal for instability and additional thunderstorms persists and actually extends right through to northern BC. So all up and down the Rockies into that very dry northeast corner. We're anticipating isolated lightning strikes on Saturday as well. So we're gonna have to see until we get through Saturday just how much lightning we pick up. Right now, the highest concentration is definitely the southeast corner, expanding westward and northwards tomorrow on Friday, and then right up to the northern border with the Yukon come Saturday. Into next week, we're looking at a quieter, what we call a westerly flow pattern, so a lot more seasonal. We're going to return to seasonal temperatures. We may pick up some much needed showers. And then beyond that, I'd love to be able to forecast lightning out through July and August, but that's just not possible.
And we'll go to Neal McLoughlin next.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to Matt's comments there, we have a couple different moisture indices that we track, and one of them gives us insight in terms of holdover ignition.
You are now rejoining the main conference.
Most of the province is available to lightning ignition, with the exception of the far northwest corner of the province. Unfortunately, we don't get to choose where lightning strikes. I think one of the things we're most concerned about is large events that bring lightning close to communities and human values. And so that's the trick is we don't have a choice in that. But really, there's concern across most of the province, and it'll be a matter of tracking storm systems as they materialize in terms of where that could occur. And if it's close to communities, that could be problematic. I think I want to emphasize what I shared earlier. It's not so much lightning, it's the pace at which we get starts. And so if we get a large, widespread lightning event that brings a
Okay, we're going to go
lot
to
of
the
lightning,
next.
that can quickly overcome our capacity to respond quickly.
All right, another technical issue with the Zoom there. We are going to move to the next question from the phones. We heard from Joe Ruddle, Vancouver's Sun. Joe, please go ahead.
Joe has left the meeting.
Thank you very much. We are going to go to Michelle Bernoro from CTV. Michelle, please go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. We've heard a bit about the lightning-caused fires. I'm wondering if you can tell me how many fires are suspected to be human-caused this year, and given the challenging conditions, how much of a concern that is this summer as well?
Cliff, I'm guessing that's a you question as well.
Thank you, Minister Ma. So yeah, we do have the breakdown. Obviously in the spring, as we entered into April, May, June, where we are now, the majority of our fires are human caused, whether that's, backyard burning, landscape level burning with industry, and at times campfires and other fire use activities. So the breakdown to date is we've had roughly 240 of our fires have been human caused. 132 of our fires have been lightning caused, which is higher than normal for this time of year. And we're picking, most of the fires we're picking up now are lightning caused fires. And then there's a handful of fires that are still under investigation with our fire origin and cause team. In terms of the concern through the next next 2-3 months. That is really why we have the ability to put fire prohibitions in place. We put the fire or category 2 and 3 prohibitions in, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, and that's to limit that backyard burning, that industrial burning. And now we're taking the I would say for this time of year, unconventional step of putting campfire prohibitions in place as well. I will say the one thing about British Columbians is that we're working through this together over the last 5-6 years. As fire has become a sort of a main problem, a main challenge for this province to face. There's far more care being taken out on the landscape when we are introducing fire. So I do not suspect it to be a challenge over the next 3 months, in particular as we have prohibitions in place, but also giving the public some credit for using fire with care and being careful with how they utilize fire. And so we've seen that over the last couple of years is a decrease in human-caused fires because there is more care in British Columbia as we all face these challenging fire seasons together.
Michelle, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. I'm not sure if you would have this information handy, but do you have any idea roughly how many hectares have burned this year in fires that were human caused?
I don't have that number directly right in front of me, but I'm happy to get that number back to you through our event coordinator.
Thank you very much. And our last question today comes from Brianna Charlebois, Canadian Press. Brianna, please go ahead.
Great, thanks so much. I'm just curious if we have any idea when you anticipate Highway 4 to reopen.
Do you have an estimate on that?
Thank you, Minister. So as I say, we have been working closely with BC Wildfire Services to understand the status of the fire. So at this point, for the safety of those folks who are fighting the fire, as well as the safety of ministry staff, it remains closed. When the fire is at a stage where we're able to get our staff in there and our contractors in there, we're on standby to do that, to get to the upslope, to be able to assess the hazards above the trees, the boulders, to make sure there's no risk of that coming down onto Highway 4, which is an extreme risk to the traveling public. So working very closely to make sure there is no delay in that time frame, but at this point, no time frame in terms of its reopening.
Do you have a follow-up, Brianna?
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm just sort of wondering if the fire is also a threat to Cathedral Grove, and if so, what's being done to protect it?
I will pass that question over to BC Wildfire Services.
At this time, the fire is not a direct threat to Cathedral Grove. Obviously, it's early. We're continuing to surge response resources to that fire, including aircraft, air tanker resources to really try to box it in where we have operable ground. So at this point in time, no, but that doesn't mean that things can't change depending on the weather over the course of the next number of days. And that's why we continue to try to surge as many resources as we can where it's safe to do so. It's steep and rocky terrain on that fire that doesn't stop us, but we have to find actionable ground for heavy equipment, for our air tanker operations and our helicopter operations. But I assure you that our staff are there and they're doing everything they can to contain that fire in a manageable box while we're also trying to deal with the challenges of the highway.
Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes today's availability. Have a good afternoon.